Welcome back to Redefine Parenting with your host, Veenu Keller. We want to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and her network on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Zingo TV is a free app that can be downloaded on iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire Sticks, Roku and Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Redefine Parenting is a revolutionary approach to nurturing our children. Veenu will bring you live experts, transformative insights, and a fresh perspective, all aimed at helping families worldwide truly understand their children. Together, let's give them a childhood they won't have to heal from. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Redefine Parenting. I'm your host, Veenu Keller, and I'm really excited to have my guest on today. You know, in this time of age in 2024, we hear a lot more of divorcing and separation and, you know, parents not being married and then them leaving and who's at stake? It's the kids, right? It's how do we create loving homes? How do we co-parent? And I know myself, I was divorced years ago and I was a single mom for two boys. And I look at myself now as lucky because he wasn't so involved. And yet I see the repercussions of him not being so involved as my kids are adults now too. So as though it was lucky for me because I didn't have the back and forth bickering, sometimes it's not so lucky for the kids. So I found this amazing attorney who actually specializes in family law, Jonathan Steele from Chicago. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yay. So we're just going to dive in. So with Jonathan and I were talking and he was telling me about, you know, like alienation from parents and what happens during divorce. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to bring him on. And I was just telling Jonathan, out of all the shows I've done, I had so many people reach out and be like, yes, please. Yes, please. We need some support. Like, how do we figure this out and stuff? So Jonathan, why don't you kind of share with us, you know, doing this for over a decade, what are some of the challenges that you see? What are some of the common denominators you're seeing when couples decide like, hey, we're done?
You know, one of the things that's hardest, I think, for parents is sort of the relinquishing of control when, you know, your child is going to the other parent's home. I think it's hard for parents to adjust to that and say, you know, I can't control the rules that are being applied in the other home, and I just sort of have to give up that control. I think that's one of the hardest things for parents.
Yeah, I think so as well. You know, I was just at an event in Italy, and one of our speakers said that we're in a pandemic of the need to be right. And part of the need to be right is that feeling of control. And I don't know, when I work with families that have gone through divorce and stuff, some of the things that I see with alienation is there's a lot of fear. There's a fear that, are they going to like the other parent better than me? Is that home going to be more comfortable for them? Are they, and that if they're hurt, they use the kids as pawn to hurt other people, like to hurt them. Right. And so I think it's I don't know, it's probably the best, like the perfect storm for things to go wrong when you put all of that together.
I think some of them don't want to be the disciplinarian either. So if the other parent is quote unquote fun, you don't want to be the one with all the rules and enforcing, you know, do your homework and brush your teeth if it's just playtime in the other house. So that's hard to balance as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the things that you do? Like when you get a husband in your office or a wife and it's like, yes, we want to get divorced. And I'm sure you ask the question, are there any kids? And they say yes. So what is your plan of action at that point, especially when it's a bitter divorce?
You know, to the extent it's possible, I try to separate the child-related issues from the money. And if possible, get the child-related issues done before even trying to tackle the money. I don't like it done in the other order. I don't like holding one up for the other. And it sometimes people will fight over parenting time and the fight really ends up coming down to child support. So it sort of weeds that out as well. So, you know, in those early stages, it's just a matter of trying to figure out what does the client want? What has their relationship with their child looked like? What kind of time are they available to parent? And do they think they can communicate and make joint decisions with the other parent? And if not, who's going to make decisions?
Yeah, I could see that being a challenge. But what if the people, because sometimes I agree, sometimes it's all about child support. I've seen that, oh, you're not paying child support, so you don't get to see the kids. And, I don't know, but I know in North Carolina, one doesn't have to do with the other. I'm not sure because I know every state has different laws. Um, is it an assumption in Chicago? It's the same way, like one has nothing to do with the other?
You can't withhold one for the other, but we are on an income shares model where if you have a 50-50 schedule, the payor is going to pay less in child support. So sometimes the other parent will push back on an equal schedule because they don't want to take a hit in child support.
Right. So what happens if it's not about money? What happens if, I'm your client, but this guy has hurt me. My husband, I've been with him for 25 years. He's now just done. He's the one that's wanting the divorce, not me, but I have no choice. Like I got to give him the divorce. And now the whole kids, like I don't want my kids to see him. I think that he's a bad guy. I think that he just kind of left us. Like what happens in those scenarios? How do we really start to try to keep a happy home?
I try to manage a client's expectations. There aren't no shortage of clients that come in and say, I want all of the parenting time. That's a hard sell. Parents that are in prison see their kids. So it's a very rare occurrence where it's truly you have all of the parenting time. I try to encourage people to think, long term and think, you may be upset with the other parent right now, but is it in your child's best interest to have two homes and to have two parents to help raise them? Ultimately it's their call at the end of the day, but I can tell them from my experience that it can be better to have both parents.
Right. And if they're still adamant, like, they're still adamant because I see it a lot. I mean, I coach these kids that have been in that tug of war, right? And these parents are literally at war, like the mom or the dad, not just the mom, but the dad is just adamant that the kid's better off not going there. They're, they have like literally they're alienating them from the other parent. And yet the other parent's like, no, 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 no. Like, how do we talk about it? Like, they're the calming one. They're the ones like, look, I don't need to see him every week. If you say they're busy, I don't need to see him every week. How about once a month even? No, no, they're too busy for you. They're too busy for you. And then you try to connect with the kids. And I'm talking like teenage kids, right? Like 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And they're like, no, I'm too busy. I'm too busy. Do judges see that? Do they say, well, no, you can't alienate them? Do they even see alienation? Or is it just kind of, well, they're old enough to make the choice so they don't have to go the other parent?
That age that you're describing is where it gets difficult. If you have a 3 or a 4-year old, whether they want to go or not, you're dropping them off and they're going. If we let kids run the show, then they're eating chocolate cake for breakfast and they're not going to school and they're not taking medicine. So parents are making decisions for them. But when you start to hit 15, 16, good luck making a 15 or a 16-year-old do anything. If you can force parenting time, it may be not quality parenting time because it's by force. So that age is tough, not just because teenagers are difficult, but because, trying to force parenting time if they don't want to go, even if it's the result of alienation, can be difficult, and courts struggle with that.
So do you deal with cases of alienation with parenting?
I've dealt with many, yeah.
And so can you share some stories and share like how to help these parents that are the ones being alienated?
It's tough. If you are sort of the victim, and really I think it's the kids that are the victim, but if you're sort of the target of the alienation, you're going to want to just have your time with your kids be quality time to the best you can and not give up that fight. Because, the last thing that's going to help the situation is for the kids to, even at 14, 15, to hear, your mom's not even trying to see you. She's not even asking the court for parenting time. That's going to make the situation worse. So you can't just give up that fight. You have to keep trying. Alienation pushed far enough, courts will flip everything on its head. If dad's doing the alienating, a court might pull the kids away from dad, put them exclusively with mom, and just hope for the best. Or in the extremes, they have sent children to something called an alienation camp, where they're with neither parent. And that's a traumatizing experience all around. So sometimes that just gets threatened to the parents to get them to start acting more mature and more child focused.
Yeah, I see the clients that I've worked with, the teenagers that I've worked with that have actually gone through this. It's the child wants to see their mom or their dad, right? I'm going to just, for the sake of this conversation, they want to see their dad, but they also feel obligation to their mom, and they don't want mom to be mad at them. They don't want the guilt trip from mom. So it's just easier to say, Dad, I'm busy. Dad, I'm busy. And that way mom stays off their case. And yet inside, they're still wanting to see their dad. And then, so if the dad's pushing it and pushing it, because I agree with you, I think that, especially because I had two older boys, and my ex-husband didn't push for anything. Like, he wasn't pushing, like, hey, I live in California, but I want to see the boys. Like, he wasn't doing that. But if the father is pushing for it, like you said, the kids are going to see, like, he's not giving up. And it's almost like it might be a reprieve for the kids that if it's court ordered, maybe their mom can get off their back because they have to follow the court order. Do you agree with that method, or do you feel like parents should just kind of back off?
I don't encourage parents to back off. I want them to keep fighting for what they think is right. You can't just let the alienating parent win because the child loses. So, I would encourage someone to keep up the fight. It's draining, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's exhausting, but there's no more important fight to have than to try to repair that relationship. And you're absolutely right about, that they feel the pressure of sort of appeasing or pleasing the parent that's doing the alienating. They don't want to be seen as like betraying the other parent by wanting to see dad. And then it can get even worse, where if you have siblings and the older sibling is saying, I don't want to see dad because they're trying to please mom, then maybe the younger one doesn't want to do something different than their sibling. And so they just sort of fall in line and not see dad. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I see that. I see that as well with some of my clients. So as an attorney, if you have a client, is it easy for you to spot if they're alienating the other parent, or is it difficult? Because where do you guys as attorneys step in and say, hey, I get you're my client and I understand you're hurting and I understand all this, but I'm going to tell you, like, this is not going to be great for the kids. Like, when does attorneys step in for that?
I'd like to think that I don't have clients that alienate, but then maybe that's just wishful thinking. I stress to clients pretty regularly. There are about 13 factors that courts look at in determining what parenting schedule is best, what decision-making arrangement is best. But one of the most important one of those factors is which parent is willing and able to facilitate a relationship with the other parent. And so I try to, have a come to Jesus with a client and say, look, imagine yourself a year from now sitting in a trial and just mounting evidence against you that you aren't facilitating a relationship with the other parent. That's not going to bode well. That's risking custody or allocation of parental responsibilities. You're risking everything here. And it's easy to not do it. There are ways to make it look as though you are in fact facilitating that relationship, and it's for the better of your child that you do that. So I do try to convince people as best I can, and not everybody listens, but I try.
Well, I think that's the only thing an attorney can do. I mean, I see attorneys that, well, I'm for my client, it's what my client wants. But I also think that there comes an obligation being a licensed attorney, knowing that it's not just a paycheck to help someone get divorced. It's you're helping them kind of rewrite their story going forward. A chapter in their life, like the book is ending for them when they're leaving a marriage and a new book is starting. And you guys have the evidence to see like what happens long run when, according to the law and stuff. And I think sometimes it's difficult, you guys are in a difficult position, especially when you have a combative client who's like, no, you just don't understand. They're so mean and they did this and this and this. And it's like, I get it. And so when people come in and you're going through divorces with them, do you have any tips for these families? Like, how do you start off being a good co-parent? What does a good co-parent even look like?
You know, what it doesn't look like is sometimes easier to explain to someone than what it does look like. And what it doesn't look like is bashing the other parent to the child. That's a huge no-no. But also bashing the other parent when the child is in earshot. That's also a huge no-no. It's putting stress on the child. They don't want to hear that their dad's a bad person. They're a deadbeat. They're not paying child support. That's not what kids are about. That's not good for them to hear that. But then there are also things that are positive that, you can tell a client that, even though you're split into two separate homes now, there are ways of having some continuity for them, which could be, if you are dad, maybe you're hanging a picture of mom in your home. And it's probably the last thing you want to do is look at a picture of mom every day, but think of it as being for your child. And that's a good way of facilitating a relationship with mom by having that picture, whether it's in the kids' rooms or in like a communal space. That's great for them. And then I think also helping them to like make gifts for Mother's Day, helping them make gifts for mom's birthday, things like that shows them that, yes, we have our differences. Yes, we're living under separate roofs, but mom's not going anywhere. We're still a family. We're just living under separate roofs. And I think things like that go a long way to demonstrating that for the kids.
Yeah, I agree. Those are great strategies. Some of the things that I add for my clients when I'm working with the family and they're like, okay, we're divorcing, this is it. I would say create the same boundaries at each home. If at mom's house, bedtime's 8:30, and then they go to dad's and they don't have a bedtime, that doesn't work so well. If they go to mom's and she's like, watching sugar intake, she's all about a balanced meal for them. She's all about exercise, like health, nutrition is important. And they get to go to dad's and they can eat SpaghettiOs out of a can and they don't care if they eat, and they can eat Snickers for breakfast, because kids, they want the easy, fun, no rules type of thing, but their frontal lobe's not developed either. So they don't realize how much they actually crave the structure and how it shows how much you care. And so I always tell my families, I say, how could you guys create the same page at each house? How do you make the routines very same? I know sometimes dads get that title, the Disneyland dad. And a lot of the moms feel like they're just not the discipline. I have to do all the discipline. I'm at the school, I'm at the conference, and he just gets to take them for the weekend and have fun. So one of the things that I suggest is, do you ask dad when he can make the conference? Maybe he can, and now we have Zoom. So it's like, can you Zoom dad in if he can't be there physically? And I feel sometimes it's a double-edged sword because the mom enjoys saying, well, dad doesn't do it. But on the other side of it, no one's asking dad. No one's telling dad, hey, the conference is this day, or hey, they're struggling and we need to talk about this, or their report card came in, and I mean, I see it. I see it day to day.
What you're describing is that, what I touched on earlier about relinquishing control when the child is in the other home. It can be hard to develop a cohesive rule set for the children if the parents aren't on the same page. In your scenario, it's easier for dad to say sugar's fine, SpaghettiOs are fine, and they're gonna be happy about it. They're gonna look forward to going over to dad's house because he lets them have ice cream every day.
Right.
But I think having that cohesive rule set is very important for kids. They do crave structure. It seems counterintuitive, but if they know where the rules are, then they know they're free within that rule set. So I think it is responsible parenting to try to come to terms, at least on major things, device usage, diet, bedtime, I think is an important one. I think that it can be hard for parents to agree on all of those things. And if you can't, then you sort of do just have to relinquish control. But it is important, as far as I'm concerned, to come to terms on a cohesive rule set as best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with you about the whole power thing. It's like as soon as we put down the power, we could start seeing what's on the other side of it. And it's like remembering that once upon a time you loved this person. You love them enough to marry them and have kids with them and create a life with them. It's so what do we have to do to get back to that? If we put everything else aside, they had an affair, that sucks. I get it. That was not what needed to happen. You feel betrayed, you feel hurt. So how do we work through that hurt so you can now co-parent? Because you said it in the beginning of this call, it's that it's the kids that are suffering, you know, and we're trying to hurt each other, but it's really hurting the kids the most. And honestly, it's teaching them how do you communicate with someone when there's conflict.
And I think they're going to model your behavior with your significant other in their own relationships. And that's important, I think, to keep in mind that you are modeling for your child. And, do you want them to grow up and have a hostile and contentious relationship with their significant other? Because that's what you're showing them. And if that's not what you want for them, then don't model that for them.
Right, right. So when your client comes in, and they're new clients and they want a divorce, is one of your goals to talk about in that, like, what does it look like to have two happy homes?
Yeah, I don't know that I phrase it that way, but I try to tease that out. That's what I'm looking for to try to understand. The concept is hard for most people to understand at first. It's a lot of people end up staying together, at least in their own minds, for the sake of the child, and they think one contentious home might be better than two, but the science on it is clear that two happy homes is going to be better than one conflict laden home. And it's really the conflict and it's the contentious nature of the relationship that is what's weighing on the kids, not so much the divorce. They will thrive under two happy homes. So I think it's hard for people to understand that. And I think it's also hard for people to understand, some people come in and it's either we fix our communication or we divorce. And, communication underlies a lot of, the symptoms that cause a divorce. And it's one of those things where you have to explain to clients that it's not one or the other. It's not, we failed at communication, therefore we're getting divorced and we don't need to work on communication anymore. If you're going to parent with that other person for the rest of your child's life, you need to figure out communication, even if you are divorcing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because communication is the key to every relationship, honestly, regardless of if you're together or not. You have to communicate about the kids, and it's teaching your kids not to play against each other either. But I'm married, and I'm going to be honest. I take care of the kids' conference. I take care of, like, there's so much stuff that as a mom I take care of that my husband doesn't want to be bothered with. But it doesn't mean that he couldn't be bothered with it. If I'm out of town, he'd be like, okay, just tell me when I'll go to the conference. I think sometimes us moms just are more involved with the school stuff, trying to figure it out. But there's a lot of dads out there too. I just think about, like, when they're separated and the mom's blaming the dad for not being involved. It's like, well, when he was married to you, how much involvement did he have with the schools? I used to work a lot with the schools when I worked with children with disabilities, and the IEP meetings were dad wasn't showing up to those meetings. Mom was, so it's also keeping that in mind too. I just think that a lot of this all stems from the one parent or both parents being hurt and, them trying to get out of that pain by hurting the other person. And I feel like these kids become this pawn for these families instead of realizing, and they think, oh, well, they're small, they're not going to remember. But it does affect them. It affects them a lot as they're growing up. It becomes that emotional significant event that creates this meaning that they get and how they handle things in the future as well. So, so what else happens when you have these people that are divorcing and it's contentious? Is there anything else that you could think of that we could share to help parents really, especially if they're contentious now, like how do we help them come on the same page? How do we help them relinquish that control, that power, and really start putting the kids in the forefront?
It takes time, and the courts are using a lot of different resources now to try to bring parents together, and some of them admittedly are not very effective and some are more effective. They will send parents to parenting classes, children in between. They'll put parents on collaboration apps like Our Family Wizard, which can help a lot. Our Family Wizard is pretty great. It has, collaborating on a shared calendar. You can exchange expenses and net out who owes who what. And then it also has a somewhat new but great feature, which is a tone meter for the messages you're sending. And if you're writing something and it's snarky or it's passive aggressive, it's going to tell you, and maybe you'll think twice about, am I going to send this message? Because maybe you didn't mean it to sound a certain way, but it does. And it's certainly better than having your lawyer proofread all of the messages that you're going to be sending. So I think using those apps, sometimes the classes can help. And I think unfortunately, it's like a trial and error sort of thing that, the kids are the ones that are being dragged along through the error part of that. And that's unfortunate.
Now, when we going back to the age of like 15, 16, 17, how much does the judge really listen to the kids versus looking at the overall situation and seeing the alienation? I know you said sometimes a judge can just flip it and just say, you know what, you're alienating, so the kids are going to go there now. But what if the kid's like, I don't want to go? Like, what does the judge do? Do they have more say or no?
I was on the receiving end of that not too long ago, where the court gave parenting time to my client who was being alienated, and the children stopped at a red light on the way home and jumped out of the car and ran from the car. So, the older you get, the harder it is, and the more the voices matter. But the courts, and myself included, are reluctant to empower kids too much and really let them think I'm running the show here, because they shouldn't be, and they shouldn't think that they are. But when you're in the younger age, you usually have what's called a guardian ad litem that represents your interests and advocates what they think is best for you. But as you start to get older, in that 14, 15, 16 range, you might have a child's representative instead of a guardian ad litem, and they're going to advocate for what you expressly want. And the hard part for a court is figuring out, okay, you're saying you don't want to see mom anymore. Is that because that's what dad's feeding to you? Is that because dad's bashing mom? What is the underlying reason here? And sometimes they'll do what's called an in-camera inspection, where it's the judge in their chambers with a court reporter and the child, and they'll do an interview, which is horrible from my view. It's traumatic, it's intimidating, it's scary for kids. They don't want to be any part of the court process. And it's always a shame when it comes to that. But that's the court's best effort to try to tease out the why of why they don't want to see that other parent.
Right. And it's hard on kids, especially if you've been married for 20 years, you have kids, they're in their late teens. Now you're getting divorced because you realize you can't be happy together and that you both deserve happiness. And it's not great for the kids to see this. And then you had a great relationship with your boys, your daughter, whatever. And then all of a sudden you divorce and the kids don't want to see you. It's like, how did we go from like, everything's great with us, now you don't like me? So you got to see, like, the poison comes from somewhere. And where are they getting this definition that dad's the bad person, or vice versa, mom's the bad person? Like they got to come up with a definition. It's not just we're great today, tomorrow dad moves out and he's the bad guy.
No, you're right. And some of the time you can hear in what the child is saying that this didn't come from the child. A 6-year-old is not saying, when they get back from dad's house, dad is irresponsible and allowed us to play in the front yard. Those are words that a 6-year-old just isn't saying. And if they are saying them, where they came from. And you're absolutely right that a lot of times the why for all of this is spite, it's vengeance, it's they're trying to get even with the other parent, using the child as a pawn or using the child to do it because they know this is really going to upset the other parent. If I withhold parenting time, the other parent is going to come to their knees. And it's hard to get someone to understand you're victimizing your child, really. There's a better way to go about this. There's a more healthy avenue for expressing that you're hurt by your spouse, and your child doesn't need to be caught in the middle of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it goes back to me, as a coach, I look at what healing do I need to do so I'm not using my kids to heal me? Because that's really it. Like you're using your kids to hurt the other person because you're hurting. But if you could heal that hurt and the hurt doesn't exist anymore, would you still feel the need to hurt that other person? Probably not. And it took me a while. Like I remember when I divorced my husband. Well, my husband and I divorced, and I had these kids, and they wanted to go there for Thanksgiving. I'm like, oh, you can't have them for Thanksgiving. Like that's my holiday, and there was a lot of fear in me. It was very much fear. And then the kids said to me, "But Mom, we want to go." And I'm like, "What?" And like, "We want to go to Dad's." And so I let them go. I let them go because they came to me, and they're like, "We want to go to Dad's." And but once that happened, something in me changed. It was no longer about what do I want, how am I going to feel? I'm going to feel lonely that these boys are not spending Thanksgiving with me. And it became about them. And so I had to learn through that experience for me personally. And so I'm kind of glad it happened. But at the same time, some people don't ever get that lesson. They just keep, no, you're not going. I don't care what you say. And then the kids feel defeated. It's like, why even tell them what I want? Because it doesn't matter. They're not going to give it to me anyway.
And if you push that too far, and if you had stood your ground and said you're not going for Thanksgiving, your dad's a jerk, or plug in whatever adjectives you want, the way that shakes out a lot of the time is they then want to move. They want to live with dad full time because you're not attentive to their needs. You're not listening to them. And so they might get older and they're 14 and 15 and saying, you might have been sort of the primary parent for the last 10, 12 years, but now we want to go live with dad.
I never even thought about that. What a good point. Yeah, because at that young age, they're like, you're not, like you said, you're not listening to me anyway. So as soon as I can, I'm going to go be where I am listened to.
Right.
That is such a good point. I never even thought about that. And my husband has gone through his stuff with his ex, with his girls and stuff, and we've gone through court and whatnot. And I always see how it affects the kids. Like it's the kids that are in the middle. And unfortunately, it's such a gray area because the person's coming after you and you're like, how are these allegations even out here? Like this doesn't even make sense. And then you get in defense mode. And then as soon as you get in defense mode, you can't even see what's going on for the kids. And I'm sure as an attorney, you see that as well.
Well, it does. It's a fine line as a lawyer because, if I'm representing mom and she comes in and tells me dad has been is a terrible person. He's a terrible dad. He's uninvolved. He doesn't care about the kids. And I'll ask, well, how long has that been the case? And it'll say forever. He's never been a good dad. Okay, well, you had multiple children with him, right? So he was a bad dad after child 1. He was a bad dad after child 2. And then you had 3, 4, and 5. That's a hard sell to a judge as a lawyer that, he's been bad all along, and yet you stayed married together and you had more and more kids. So that story requires a little bit of refining, even if there is a morsel of truth in there, because you stayed with him for a reason. So there must have been some redeeming qualities in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that there's attorneys like you out there. I mean, I do feel that sometimes because I work with my clients and they'll be like, they'll get papers. They'll be like, could you believe that they said this about me? And I know the mom because I've been working with them for a year or whatever. And I'm reading these papers and I'm like, oh my gosh, like how did he even come up with this stuff? And then the mom's like, okay, now I have to defend myself. And now it's like a big defense. And it's like, again, the kids just don't even get seen, and now there's a battle and the kids are the ones that are underneath like the gunfire, if you would.
It is a fine line that we walk as lawyers. We are advocates to some extent. We're puppets and we have to do what our clients want us to do, but there's limits to that. We also have obligations towards children, notwithstanding our advocate hats. And we always have the option of withdrawing. We don't have to continue to represent someone that we think is harming a child, even if that's what they're telling us to do, even if that's what they're telling us they want. And so we can withdraw and we can say, what you're doing is not good for a child and I don't want to be any part of it. So good luck. I'm not going to help you further this cause anymore. And not a lot of lawyers will do that. Not a lot of lawyers think beyond the billable hour, and I understand, but there's a child caught in the mix, and sometimes you do need to stand up to a client because they're not thinking clearly and they're victimizing their child. So I think it's important to put your foot down sometimes and say, I understand you're paying me by the hour to do your bidding, but your bidding here is harming a kid. And so there are certainly times where I've said, I'm drawing a line here. I don't like the way this is going. I don't like what your plan is here, and I've withdrawn.
Nice. So you've done it.
Sure.
Yeah. My mom is a lawyer too. And so, she has shared at times that what the client was asking, and she's just like, I can't do it. And she would tell them. And then the client either fired her or changed their tune.
Well, because also, the example I gave earlier where sometimes I'll Mirandize a client and say, what you're doing is going to hurt you in a custody trial. What you're doing is not demonstrating a willingness and ability to facilitate that relationship. And this is going to bite you in the butt when this goes to trial. And if you don't have the backbone to get out as the lawyer and you see it through to the trial and what you predicted happens and the judge says you're not a good fit to be the primary parent because you're not going to facilitate that relationship, so I'm giving the other parent primary parenting, all of a sudden your client's looking at you saying, this is your fault, you didn't tell me this was going to happen, and all of a sudden you're on the defensive as the lawyer. So I do think it's important if they're on that war path and that war path ends badly that you put your foot down.
Yeah. I think another thing besides a guardian ad litem or a child representative is that courts should start hiring us coaches that do family coaching to come in and talk with both families and come up with a family plan for the kids.
We have something like that. We use parenting coordinators. That's kind of coaching. When I think of coaching, I think of more individual coaches for one parent or the other. But courts are leaning into parenting coordination more and more now. And it's a mixed bag. Some parent coordinators are great, and the courts give them a little bit of decision-making authority. They can resolve certain disputes, which keeps people out of court. It keeps costs down, and it can be helpful. So I would be all in favor of whether it's a coach or a parenting coordinator or mediator or whatever, helps people put their kids first is a good tool to be using.
Yeah, I helped a family that was going through divorce that I was working with, and I would spend some time at dad's house. I'd spend some time at mom's house, and because I have my in-home turnaround where I move in with families for 4 days, and so I was moving in right at the time that they were divorcing. Like the papers literally got filed, and it worked out, and like they have a good relationship. Like I had to talk to mom about how she talked about dad. I had to talk to dad about how he presented mom in front of the kids. Because the kids aren't teenagers yet, they're preteens, but it was like, and it worked out really well. And when there was issues, instead of calling and yelling at each other, they would come talk to me, and I was able to help them see it in a different eyes, mind's eye, so they could deal with it differently. But the moment they got on defense and they felt like, oh, I have to hurt that person, that's when things went awry. And so having a coach and being able to ask them the right questions, like, what is the outcome here? What is it that you really want? And getting out of the blame and shame. That's where I feel co-parenting exists at its best, when we're not blaming and shaming the other parent. If something happened and you didn't like the way it was, to not say, well, you were at your dad's, I can't help you. If your dad was more attentive, he would have taken care of that. You're going to have to talk to your dad about that. Instead of just saying, okay, well, it happened. You know, talk to me. What can I do to support you to get through this? Like, what do we need to do to undo it? What do we need to do to move forward? And it's just kind of taking the ball once you get it and going with it instead of trying to berate the other parent because they didn't do it the way you wanted it. And now you're in this mess or whatever, you know, especially when you have kids that are challenging, that are having issues at school, that are having issues with their friends or whatnot, you know. I mean, I've been on that end too, where parents want to blame each other. Well, if they weren't at their house, he wouldn't have done that. And it's like we're negating the fact that the kid already did what he did. He already stole from the store. It doesn't matter whose house he was at. We need to take care of the problem, not. But they again go over the problem and they want to blame each other.
The blame game is wildly ineffective. You know, it just doesn't matter most of the time whose fault it is. You have to address the issue. You know, if the child is becoming a social media addict or they're living on their phone, and dad bought the phone, mom might say, well, it's your fault, you bought him the phone. Well,
100%.
okay, the fact of the matter is the child has a phone now and they're addicted to it. So we need to address the addiction to the phone, not blaming me. You know, it's too late now. He has a phone, we got to fix it. And it's just, maybe it's human nature to say it's your fault, it's not my fault. But it stops people from looking at what the actual issue is and problem solving.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because my twins are 12 and we're literally in that phase of accountability. Like that's the phase of life we're in right now is I get this as happening. Where are you accountable for you? And unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of training in that, especially when it comes to adults, because we still want to blame everybody else for it, except for dealing with the problem. And you know, screens are a big thing. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues I have with the kids that I coach and they're living in two separate homes is that well, at dad's I'm allowed to be on my screens and I'm fine at my dad's. I don't know why when I go to mom's, she just shuts it down and says, well, you've been on it a lot at your dad's. And she doesn't even know I wasn't on it, but an hour, like it's just back and forth. It's
Well,
like,
that's why that united front is important, and it requires a team. Even if you're not together as a couple anymore, you're a team for your kids, and you do need to, on major things at least, apply the same set of rules because kids have a tendency to be manipulative. They're great at it, and well, dad lets me do this, and so now mom's going to let the child do it because dad's letting the child do it. So it's important to say, to come together and say that these are the rules we're going to apply. This is how much screen time you get. This is how much sugar you get. This is the bedtime. Even if I don't like you as the other parent, we need to apply the same set of rules so that they're not playing us against each other.
no, I love that. So when they come to you, do you have certain questions like what is your outcome when they're in two different homes? Like, do you get their say in it to see like where your starting point is with the person?
You know, I try to ask questions to figure out what the real goals are because a lot of people come in and they use buzzwords or phrases that in the courtroom they don't really even mean anything. Some people come in and they say I want sole custody, and that raises more questions than it answers for me because at least in Illinois we don't have custody anymore. We have allocation of parental responsibilities. So I like to ask, what exactly do you mean? Are you referring to parenting time? Are you referring to decision making? If you're referring to parenting time, why is it that you don't want the other parent to see the child? And try to tease out exactly what they were looking for and why, because otherwise, and a lot of times, you know, somebody will come in and they say, I want 50-50 because that's fair. Okay, well, what schedule? What days, what hours? I don't know, just 50-50. And that's just, it's more they're wedded to the number there than they are, what the parenting schedule should be. So I like to ask more questions about what does the schedule actually look like, and try to figure out, what is the client looking for? Why are they looking for that? Because a lot of times there are legitimate reasons for, I don't want dad to see the child because, there's abuse or something, or there's addiction. And then, there is a legitimate concern, and it's not just I'm spiteful and I don't want dad to see them and I want to punish him. So it's important to not, be dismissive of everybody that says that, and to try to figure out, is there a good reason for it or not.
Yeah, I think if I was an attorney, I think one of the questions I would ask is, what is your outcome for your kids? Because hopefully most parents are going to be like, I want them to be happy. I want them to be healthy. I want them to know they're loved. I want them to know this isn't their fault, that, we both love them. And that's a great place to start. Say, okay, so now we can build something from that, and if that was going to happen, what does that look like? And I love that Illinois doesn't have custody anymore. I know here in North Carolina, we have, there is still custody, but it's where the kids live, but the decision. So there's like joint custody when it comes to decision making, but I think it's called residential custody or something like that, where the kids live, and then we get parenting time. So it's interesting how every state's different.
We moved away from the custody title just because it was an emotional trigger for people, sole, joint. And also, when we're allocating parental responsibilities instead of just joint or sole, it gives the court the ability to, with a scalpel rather than just a hatchet, to fashion a remedy. Sometimes, if mom is a teacher and dad's a doctor, maybe you give medical decision making to dad, educational decision making to mom, and then you split the religion and extracurricular. Whereas before, it was basically all or nothing. It was either sole or it was joint, and that's it.
That's interesting. I think, though, for our listeners, if they're going through divorce or if they're separated, to really think of what is life going to look like 10 years from now, because, the pain is going to subside. You're going to go on with life. You're going to find a new partner, or maybe you're going to find greatness in being single, raising your kids. But what is it going to look like for your kids? Like, the decisions that you make today shape their future. It really does.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned it earlier that some parents think, well, I got a free pass for now because my child's 2 or 3 and they're in that amnesia age, and so they won't remember what I'm doing. But it's not like a light switch where one day they remember. They start to pick up on tone, they start to pick up on body language, and they start to remember things sooner than you realize. And so you don't want to start a bad habit, even if your child is in that amnesia age. And it's also, I think, there's a tendency to match bad behavior. So if dad is bad mouthing mom, then mom might start bad mouthing dad. And the expression "two wrongs don't make a right."
Right.
It may be cliche, but if I'm representing mom and dad's bad mouthing mom, I'm going to tell mom, do not start bad mouthing. Do not stoop to that, because it's causing tension for the child. Let us try to fix dad's behavior. Don't stoop to it.
Right. I mean, that's one thing that we did when my husband daughters, when we met, they were 3 and 6, and I would always talk great about their mom, and we talk about being the queen of the house, and I'm like, and your mom's the queen of her house, and because I never wanted them to feel the contention, and then like if we had anything to say about what was going on, we did it when we didn't have the girls.
That's the right way. For sure.
Definitely made a point for that. So we only have a couple minutes left. So, you're an attorney in Illinois. So how could people find you if they need a really good family attorney who really is there for his clients? I love what you have said today.
I have a website that's got all my contact information. It would be steelefamlaw.com. It's got my social handles, all that jazz, but it has my contact information as well.
Well, thank you for all the information today. For all our listeners all over the world, this doesn't matter if you're in the United States or if you're in Australia. We have to put our kids first. Differences happen. Sometimes you're just great people, but you're not great together. But whatever you did, you have this beautiful child now that their future depends on how you guys move through this. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. If you have any questions, reach out to my social media. You know how to get a hold of Jonathan. And thank you for joining our show. Have a good night, everyone. Us on another episode of Redefine Parenting with Veenu Keller. Follow her on Instagram at Veenu Inspires. To learn more about Veenu, as well as download her free ebook now, go to www.veenuinspires.com. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all your news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it.